Hey folks, Quill18 here, and welcome to another tutorial for Magic the Gathering Arena for complete beginners. Although, it is for complete beginners, but this one's going to be a little more crunchy, because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the finer intricacies of the rules of Magic the Gathering, as well as some of the user interface mechanics that you can play with in Arena to tweak that. So for example, if we go into the options menu over here and go into gameplay, there's a lot of things we can tweak over here. We're going to leave these options in there, but it is worth noting that those are there. The other thing that's quite valuable is if you look down below at these hotkeys. And actually, a lot of what we're going to be doing today are some of the things that these hotkeys exist for. So I'm going to hit play. I'm going to go into a bot match, and I'm going to bring in this deck, the Simic Flash deck, that I've been playing on ranked. And the reason I'm going to play this one for this tutorial is because a lot of the cards I have in this deck are going to interact in a more advanced way with some of the game mechanics. Let's talk about mulliganing really quick. It's been mentioned a couple of times, but I do want to mention it again. The way mulligan works, the mulligan rules that are used in Magic the Gathering Arena are as such. You get your opening card, your opening hand of 7 cards. You can keep those 7 cards, or you can mulligan. If you do, you shuffle that back into your deck. You get a new hand of 7, but you can no longer keep all 7. You would only keep all 6. If you mulligan again, you still draw 7, but now you can only keep 5. So if I hit this button here, the game's going to require that I put 2 of my cards, because I only get to keep 5, at the bottom of my deck. Like so, and then I would start with only 5 cards, which is pretty poor. I'm going to go ahead and just drop out of this so that we don't actually have such a small hand, mostly because I want more options to be able to show off more of the rules here. In Arena, you actually don't have to mulligan very often. And the reason for that is, and I mentioned this in the deck building tutorial, your opening hand of 7 cards actually gets drawn twice. Behind the scenes, Arena draws the 7 cards twice, and then shows you the one that's got the amount of land closest to the expected average. However much you're expected to have on average in your opening hand, which for most decks that you're going to build is going to be about 3, that gets shown to you. So you're going to see 3 land in your opening hand quite often, and then 2 or 4 slightly less often. And it'll be really, really, really unusual for you to only see 1 or 0 or something like that, because both opening draws, both times it drew 7 cards, would have to come up with a 0 land to show you a 0 land hand. As a result, mulliganing doesn't come up very often in Arena, which I think is wonderful. This only applies if you're playing in the best of 1 format. I believe if you're playing in the sort of best 2 out of 3 format with sideboarding and everything, that mechanic doesn't exist. But in a best of 1, because there's this is a good way to reduce some of the variance and randomness that you might see in Magic based on card draw in something that's a best of 1, so it makes it a little bit more more typical. But mulliganing is not something you're normally going to want to do. The biggest thing I would say, because the land situation in Arena is fairly well taken care of for you, I think the biggest thing that you'll happen to see in your hand is like, yeah, I got 3 land, that's great, but all my other cards in here cost like 4, 5, or 6 mana or something like that. I'm not going to be able to play something forever. That's more of a deck building issue. Most likely you have too many expensive things and not enough cheap things in your deck, so keep that in mind. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and keep this 7-card hand here. We're going to let Sparky take his first turn. And now on my turn, I'm going to put down a Temple of Mystery so that we can talk about the Scry mechanic. Some cards, even in the core set here, for example, Temple of Mystery, which is in the core set, have the ability to scry. If I go and play this in, what it's going to do, it's let me peek at the top card of my library, and then I get to choose if I want to leave it on top, which is what's going on here. You see bottom, top. So right now the forest would be left on top of my deck. If I move it to the left over here, you can see it tucks under the deck, and it's also on the bottom side over here. So with Scry, you get to choose if you're going to leave the card on top or at the bottom. There's another variant of Scry called Surveil. I actually don't know if Surveil is in the base game. Let me hit this View Battlefield button. By the way, hey, there you go, part of the tutorial. View Battlefield, if I do this, it'll hide what I'm doing here, and I can look over here. Yeah, see, Sinister Sabotage has Surveil, but it's not in the core set. I actually don't know if it is or not. But in any case, if I hit View Browser over here, back here, the difference between Scry and Surveil also lets you peek at the top card of your deck, and also gives you the option of leaving it there, but instead of putting it at the bottom of your deck, with Surveil, you would actually drag it over into your graveyard, which has certain pros and cons. You might actually play a deck where you want to intentionally put things into your graveyard. I'm going to put the forest on top of my deck for now, just to be able to showcase something. I'm also going to just temporarily... Okay. Hang on a sec there. Oh, I need to put a manual stop is what I need to do. Okay. Let me play another Temple of Mystery. There's something I specifically wanted to show here. I'm going to leave the Night Pack Ambusher on top of my deck. Alright. Magic the Gathering Arena, by default, if there's nothing you can do, will automatically skip your turns and keep going until the next time that there's something you can do. So situations where you might not be able to do something include you have no mana, or you have nothing that you can cast at instant speed, right? On Sparky's turn here, if I don't have anything that it can cast at instant speed, then I'm not going to be able to do anything on Sparky's turn. So whenever Sparky, when Sparky says that he's done, then it's just going to skip ahead like that. What I want to showcase here with Scrying is you can see I did the Scry and I left the Night Pack Ambusher on top of my library, and it's still face up. That is only visually there for me. My opponent can't see this. You can see it says private information. Only you can see this card. Keep that in mind. It's very easy to have assumed that with Scrying, you've revealed this card on top of your deck. That is not the case. It's just here as a reminder, because otherwise you can't see it. Okay, let's... what I'm going to do here, I want to talk about the phase of the game. And I think the best way for me to do that is to actually go on my opponent over here. So this is me down here. This is my opponent here. And there are a number of steps in the game. I will say phases sort of interchangeably with steps, even though they are technically slightly different things in Magic, but let's pretend they're not. So anyway, there are a number of steps that happen on your turn. There's the upkeep and draw step. There is the first main step, followed by an attacking step, followed by your second main, followed by the end step over here. Now, generally speaking, most cards you can play can only be played during the main step, either your first or second one. This is where you play land, this is where you play sorceries, this is where you play artifacts and enchantments, this is where you play summon creature spells and summon planeswalker spells. And only during your own main step. Outside of your own main step, you generally, as a rule, can't play any cards or necessarily take any actions, unless those things happen to happen at instant speed. For example, cards that actually say instant on them, like Opt over here, is an instant spell. Instants can be played during any step of you or your opponent's turn. So during Sparky's upkeep step, I could play Opt, for example. Lots of flexibility over there. Now, if you have a creature that has an ability on it, or actually anything, if you have any kind of permanent that has an ability on it listed. I don't actually have any here to show you, but a creature might be something like, it'll have tap to do a thing, or pay 2 mana to do a thing. Those actions all happen at instant speed, which means any permanent, so usually you'll see it on creatures, but artifacts and enchantments and things may have that as well. Those abilities can be played anytime you can play an instant, which includes on your opponent's turn, and includes your non-main steps and things like that, which includes in the middle of combat, which is really powerful to keep those timings in mind. Now, the game here, Arena, if you can't play anything, will automatically skip ahead. If you can, it will keep pausing anytime there's an ability to do something. So for here, right now, I'm in my first main step, and it's paused. It hasn't continued, because technically I have enough to play Opt. If I hit next, it's going to go to the start of attack step over here. So at the beginning of combat, we are no longer in a main phase. So I wouldn't be able to cast a sorcery or a creature or play a land or do anything like that, because we're in the attack step. We're not in the main step anymore. But I can cast instants. Now, even though I have no attackers, there is still technically the start of combat, which is where we are now, and still an end of combat step, which is what's going to happen if I hit next. It says 2 attackers, but because there's no attackers or blockers, it's going to skip through those and go to the end of combat. And actually, it'll skip through there on my turn, because it makes no difference whether I were to cast something at the end of my combat or in my second main phase. It'll skip right ahead, but it will be slightly different on my opponent. So I'm going to end my turn over here, and it'll go to my opponent's turn. Now, by default, it will skip the upkeep and draw step. But now, Sparky has said they are done with their main step, and so now it's going into the combat phase. The game is pausing to give me an opportunity to do something, because I can cast Opt right now. I may hit pass. Now Sparky has a chance to declare attackers, and the game pauses again. there's another chance to respond to things. After Sparky has declared attackers, I get a chance to take actions. This is really, really, really important to keep in mind if you have spells that you might want to use on your opponent's creatures. You could use it, the spell during your turn, but oftentimes it's way better, way sneakier, and way more powerful if you wait not only for your opponent's turn, but wait until they've actually committed that creature to combat. Or maybe multiple creatures. Like, they might be like, oh, I'm going to attack with these 3. And you're like, okay, yeah, but one of those creatures, I'm going to go ahead and kill with this spell. Maybe it's a red direct damage spell. Maybe it's a black instant kill spell. Maybe there's a blue spell that you will use to bounce a creature back in someone's hand. And now all of a sudden, they thought they were attacking with 3 creatures, but they're only attacking with 2. And maybe that affects how you can block. Very nice and tricky. I'm going to go ahead and set pass. So, first, in combat, it paused at the start of combat, before anyone was declared an attacker. Now it's paused after attackers were declared, before we go to the declare blockers phase. If I hit pass here, it would give us a chance to declare blockers if I had any. And then, at the end of the declare blockers step, it's going to pause before we go to damage dealing. Now we're going to do that. And then it could give you an option to pause one more time in this phase here, the Sparky's main phase and whatever, but because of reasons, it doesn't have to show us that. But because, again, Arena will automate a few things. But before Sparky's turn over, so right now, we are in Sparky's end step over here. Before Sparky's turn fully ends, I still have one more chance to cast instants. And this is often what you're going to want to do. Because now, Sparky is done with his main phases. So he can't do anything that he would normally be only able to do in main phase. He can't play land, play most creatures, artifacts, enchantments, sorceries, none of those. Sparky could still play instants, but now we know that no matter what we do, most likely Sparky won't be able to really respond to it. Before his turn ends, I'm going to cast Opt. Because here, it's an instant. I may as well use this on his turn, rather than use it on mine. The advantage here is I leave my mana untapped for as long as possible. And with the deck that I'm playing here, with various counterspells and something like that, that's something very important. I want to wait until here's the general rule of thumb. Wait until the last possible second to do something. That includes, let's say it's your turn, right? And you can cast a creature. Let's say you've got a creature in play that can attack, and you've got a creature in your hand that you can cast. You should not, most of the time, you should not cast your creature, then attack with the one. Keep in mind, your newly cast creature is going to have summoning sickness, so it's not going to be able to attack anyway. Right? So you should not cast a creature, then attack with the other one, and then end your turn. Instead, what you should do is not play anything. Keep your mana untapped, keep your hand secret, attack with the lone creature by itself. Your opponent doesn't know. Maybe you're saving mana to do something sneaky. Use a giant growth or something like that. Is your opponent's going to be like, do I block? Do I not block? I don't know. It leaves huge question marks in your opponent's mind and gives them more opportunity to make mistakes. And then after the combat is over and you go into your second main phase, then cast your creature. So here I'm going to cast Opt. It's going to let me scry. Well, I already know what card's at the top of my deck. It's the Night Pack Ambusher. So I'm going to leave it there once again. And Opt also lets me draw a card, which is very nice. Now it's my turn. So this is the normal flow in Arena. And it will vary. How many places it stops will vary a little bit depending on the situation. But you can manually change this. First of all, you can mark a phase to explicitly stop on. If you go... So normally, Magic the Gathering Arena doesn't tend to stop on your opponent's upkeep and draw step. If I click this button right here, I've put a stop. I've requested that the game stops on this phase because I might want to do something. So let me take my turn here. Let me go and I'm going to put in a breeding pool. I'll pay 2 life so it's not tapped, and I'm going to end my turn. Now, I'm going to hit next. Hit next again and hit end turn. There's an easy way to do this. We'll show that next turn here. But I'm going to end my turn, and the game's going to stop over here in the upkeep step. So it is now my opponent's turn. They have just processed their upkeep, if there was any. And before it goes into their draw, it's giving me an opportunity to take an action if I wanted to, because I put a stop there. You can put a bunch of these. You can do this, that, and that. I've declared stops on everything. There's also this little indicator down here. Now, by default, this is not enabled. You have to go into gameplay. Show phases right there. If I turn that off, it won't show the phases there. There'll still be the phases up here. Well, I guess these are steps as opposed to phases. Technically, there's a slight difference in that each step could have multiple sub-phases, so that's different there. I quite like having this enabled right there, because it's kind of nice to be able to, click on some of these buttons over here and I can issue a bunch of stop requests on each of these different phases. Or steps. Words are hard. Now, as an alternative to hitting all these buttons here, what I could do is go into full control mode. Assume full control by literally tapping the control key. See where it says full control over here? So I've turned it on. If I tap it again, I turn it off. Tap it on, tap it off. Take a look at your options here in gameplay. You can see full control is toggled by default by tapping the control key. There's also hold full control. So by default, with full control, what this is going to do is it's going to force the game to stop at every single possible time it can stop. It will do so. Not only that, this will turn off the auto tapper as well. By default, Arena tries to tap the correct land for you when you cast a spell, and it mostly does the right thing. But there might be a situation where it's really important that you tap a specific set of land, get your mana in a specific set of way, because you have another spell you want to cast, and you're not sure if the auto tapper will do the right thing. Although you can see, if I go and hover over this, it'll show me what land's going to tap. It's going to tap both my Temple of Mysteries and not tap my Breeding Pool, which in this case makes literally no difference because they all do the same thing. They all tap for either green or blue. But let's say for some reason I wanted to play my Cutthroat, but I really wanted to make sure you use the Breeding Pool instead of a Temple of Mystery. Again, there's no reason to do that here, but what I could do is I could hit control to go into full control. If I do this... Oh, it will auto-tap. Really? I thought it didn't on full control. Apparently I'm telling you a lie. Well, my bad. You can pre-tap them. If you've tapped the mana ahead of time yourself by literally just clicking and choosing mana, then it will use that instead of tapping for you. Oh, that was my bad. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and resolve this. And what I'm going to do, and you can see full control will end after, I guess, you respond to something. But now it's going to give me all the options to, there we go, pass over there. If I hit shift control, there you go. Now we're in permanent full control all the time. It's going to stop at every single possible moment that the game can stop. So there you go. It's going to stop. Now, I have nothing I can do. I have no instance that I can cast. I have no mana for anything. I literally can't do anything. But because of this, the game's still going to ask me for a response on every single action. Now, generally speaking, in this case, when I literally can't do anything, there's not much of a good reason to do that. So it's going to respond to the sub-step that's going to happen. Because here's the thing. You can respond to the spell being cast, and then when this particular creature comes into play, it triggers an effect, right? When it enters the battlefield, it does a thing. Well, that's another effect that you can respond to. So it's going to stop at every single possible thing that it is technically legal to respond to. It will now stop. What's nice about this is actually a good way to learn some of the mechanics of the game. I'm not going to block. Thank you very much. And do this. This is also a good way to bluff that you might have something to play. Because here's the thing, Arena will automatically skip actions if you can't do anything. So if your opponent plays something, and the priority immediately goes back to them, they know, if there was an instant pass that happened there, with no delay, they know that you probably can't respond to anything they're doing, right? You're not holding a counter spell or an instant of any kind like that, so it might give them a little bit of information if you're passing right away. Whereas if you put on full control, and you manually pass after, a beat, then your opponent might think, oh, they have something in their hand they can cast. They just chose not to do it. Now, this, of course, can be very annoying and very bad manners if you take too much time, but you can enable this, and as long as you're passing fairly quickly, you can go ahead and do that. Like, oh, yeah, I could go, but I'm not going to. Notice we're still in full control, so it's going to pass, upkeep into draw. It's going to give me every opportunity to have full control. I'm going to go ahead and hit control to turn that off, because that's way too slow. We're not going to want to do that. We'll go in main phase. Now we're going to be back in sort of the normal auto-skip kind of mechanic. I'm going to drop an island. The game is, because I have things I can cast, it is going to stop and prompt me for things right now. But I'm going to move on. Now, instead of hitting next to go to the next phase, I'm going to use the spacebar. So spacebar, right here, pass priority. This is the same thing as hitting this next button. This is the button you hit when you don't want to do anything. You hit next. So if I hit spacebar, it's the same as hitting next. Same thing here. Declare attackers. If I hit spacebar, it's going to do that. If I hit spacebar again, it's actually going to choose the all attack over here. So if I hit spacebar, it's going to declare all my creatures as attackers. And if I hit spacebar again, it's going to skip to the blocking phase. So if you just want to, like, you know, just burn through your turn really quick and attack with everything. You know, it's fine. Just go spacebar, 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 spacebar. It'll skip your phases. It'll select all your creatures to attack, and it'll just go to the attacker. But if you don't actually want to attack with everything blindly, don't just mash the spacebar. You're going to want to make sure to say something probably like, hey, no attack over here. And end turn. So my opponent's going to take an action. My opponent's going to cast Pacifism on my Cutthroat. Now, it would be really nice if I had one of my cards in my hand right now, like Unsummon. So Unsummon is a spell that lets you target a creature and return it to the controller's hand. I could have responded to this Pacifism by unsummoning my Cutthroat, which would put it back into my hand. And what would happen at that point, any spell that needs to target something, which this does, for example, if it no longer has a legal target, that spell will fizzle. And by that I mean, even if it had, like, if I had, like, 10 creatures out, it was trying to Pacifism this one, and I bounced Cutthroat to my hand, this Pacifism would no longer have its target. Its target no longer exists. This Pacifism would fizzle, and would go immediately to the graveyard of your opponent. Now, in this scenario, the difference between having this card fizzle versus counterspelling it is basically non-existent. But it might have certain effects. The other neat thing is, if this is very relevant if you're playing the Throne of Eladrin. God, I don't have any of the cards in my hand to demonstrate what I want to talk about here. In Throne of Eladrin, there are these adventure cards where the card, it's like kind of a creature card, but it also can be cast as an instant or a sorcery instead. But if you cast it as an instant or a sorcery, it will be exiled, but then you can still cast the creature later on. I know it's a lot of phrases, but if you've seen the adventure cards, you'll know what I'm talking about. What's interesting is if they use the adventure card for its instance or sorcery effect, and it fizzles or gets countered, the card goes into the graveyard instead of being exiled, and therefore be playable as the creature again. I'll try to show you an example when we draw one, but it's really powerful. Here, I do not want my Cutthroat to become Pacifism, so I'm going to counter it. So counter spells are a thing that is, well, generally that's the purview of blue. Blue has the counter spells over here. So this is an instant. I'm going to cast an instant here. And actually, I'll go into full control mode to show this off. Because I'll hit this. I'm going to cast this instant called Sinister Sabotage. And it says counter target spell. I have to choose which spell to counter. Now, if I wasn't in full control mode, it would have automatically picked Pacifism, because it's literally the only option. If multiple spells were on the stack, because here's how this works. Someone does an effect, okay? It can be anything but a land. So land you can't respond to. But otherwise, if someone does a thing, so taps a creature to use an ability, or casts a spell from their hand or something like that, it goes on the stack. And then each player can start responding to those spells on the stack. You can even respond to your own. By default, it won't give you time to respond to your own. It's going to assume, well, you cast your own, so we'll just resolve it, and then, you know, you can cast your next spell. If you're in full control mode, you can actually respond to your own castings, which can sometimes be rather useful. And yeah, so it'll be the stack here. Even if I was not in full control mode, if there were multiple spells on the stack and I cast a counter spell, it would ask me at that point, what do you actually want to counter? So here I'm going to target Pacifism. Boom. So I'm going to submit this as the one and only target for Pacifism. Like, literally, Sinister Sabotage can't target more than one thing, so submitting more than one would not be legal. I will submit that. There we go. Now you can see the stack is actually getting bigger. Brineborn Cutthroat has an ability on it, an effect on it, that when I cast a spell during an opponent's turn, I put a +1/+1 counter on Brineborn Cutthroat. It's important to note that when you cast a spell, doesn't require the spell to resolve. At this point, if Sparky had his own counter spell, and he countered my Sinister Sabotage over here. By the way, when you're looking at a stack like this, if you need to see a card, you can right-click on it to see it. So if I didn't know, what was this card again? You right-click on it. Oh, yeah, Sinister Sabotage. If Sparky, at this point, countered Sinister Sabotage, the Brineborn Cutthroat's ability would still go off. Because casting a spell is at this point. It hasn't resolved yet, but it has been cast, so this will go through. And then, especially when I'm in full control mode, I can choose the resolution. At this point, if I could cast another instant, I could do it. Otherwise, what I can do is resolve. Now, you can hit resolve all. It'll work through this entire stack, doing all of it. But we'll do it one at a time. I will resolve the first effect. So the Cutthroat will get its +1/+1 token. Now we're back over here. Once again, if I had something I could cast, I could use another instant spell or ability or something at this point. So I let the first thing resolve. Now I'm going to do the Sinister Sabotage. So I will let this resolve now. So that will counter that. And then the stack will end because their pacifism is no longer in the stack. Sinister Sabotage has the Surveil ability, so I look at the top card of my library, I can leave it there, or I can drag it into the graveyard. Yeah, I'll do that. I've got plenty of land. I'll put the island away. Is that the correct play? I don't know, but that's what we're going to do. So there we go. We're still in full control mode for now. So we'll pass. We'll pass. He's going to attack with both. I don't want to lose my Cutthroat, so I'm going to declare no blockers. Done and done. Okay. I'll play my Forest over here. So, at this point, now, with the fun thing with this deck is literally everything in this deck can be cast at instant speed. That's the idea with this Simic Flash. So all my creatures have Flash on it. Flash can be cast when you can cast an instant. The idea with this deck is I literally never have to cast anything on my turn, ever, at all. It's fun. So, what I could do here is I could attack with a Cutthroat, right? But I don't want to. I want to leave him here as a blocker, especially... Well, I didn't want to block this turn because he would have died. He gets bigger every time I cast a spell on my opponent's turn. So let's assume that I might be able to cast a spell on my opponent's turn to make the Cutthroat bigger, and I want to keep him around as a blocker. So I don't want to do anything this turn. Now, I could hit this button, go next to combat, then, next to declare attackers, next to blockers, and next to this, and next to this, and next to this. I could do that. Or I could hit spacebar a bunch of times, except for the time that would make the Cutthroat attack. But there's also this button over here, which is pass turn. If I hit this button, it'll just pass all these times when the game is waiting for me to do something, or in a phase, it will pass all those. Now, it's important to note, if my opponent does something that I can respond to, this will not skip that. So if I hit this button, it's just going to burn through my turn. Boom, 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 boom. Now it's my opponent's turn. If Sparky had cast an instant, say, in my end step, the game would not have automatically skipped forward. It would have given me a chance to respond. We'll see the same thing here. Bit of a risk, but sure. I'm going to hit this button, and you'll see at some point Sparky's going to do something, and I'm still going to get the ability to respond, including, so for example here, to declare blockers. The game's smart enough to know that, by default, this says, okay, I don't want to do anything on my own, but I still maybe want to be able to do something if something goes terribly wrong. So that's what's going on here. It's going to let me choose a blocker, or if Sparky had cast a spell, it would have paused to let me respond, assuming I had something in my hand I could respond with. I'm going to toggle this off over here. So there you go. So it won't continue auto-skipping. If I hit this button now, it would be the same as skipping over here. It would assume you want to keep going. This is bound to a hotkey. Enter, by default over here, is the same as hitting double arrow. If you were to hit Shift-Enter, this is the super hardcore, I really don't want to do anything, period, skip mode. Probably you don't want to do Shift-Enter ever, because if my opponent attacked, it wouldn't even ask me for blockers as far as I know. I wouldn't know, I've never done it, and I don't want to. So, what I'm going to do here is I will declare a blocker there. There we go. How come it's not giving me a chance? Did I already pass opportunities to do this? No, that doesn't make any sense. It should be letting me cast a spell here. Isn't it? Oh, there we go. That's what was going on. Okay. No, it is not a bug. It is me misinterpreting something. Whoever's turn it is, and this is Sparky's turn, whoever's turn it is always has priority to do something. If I had declared a blocker here, and I said, okay, that's my blocker, I have to hit the button and give Sparky the first opportunity to cast instants. And then it would come to me. So now it's finally my chance to cast my instants. So what I would have wanted to do is declare the Cutthroat as a blocker, then cast an instant, which would have let me put a +1/+1 token on the Cutthroat so that he wouldn't have died. Plus, specifically, I wanted to cast the Ambusher to have another 4/4, so I would have had, the Cutthroat would have been a 4/3, so I would have blocked and killed the Sage. The Ambusher was a 4/4, which would have blocked and killed the officer over here. But I misinterpreted what happened because I forgot about the turn priority system. Well, that's my bad. So I'll take some extra damage here. Let me just lose to Sparky here. Okay, at the end of Sparky's turn, I definitely want to get down an Ambusher. But yeah, I didn't need to take that 5 damage, and I could have killed all of his stuff. I'm low on health. I can't kill him right now. I definitely don't want to attack. I'm just going to hit enter correctly this time to just pass the rest of my turn. During my end step, my Knightpack Ambusher, because I didn't cast anything on my turn, makes a 2/2 creature, except it's getting a +1/+1 from this. Eternal Isolation. So he wants to go and put my creature at the bottom of my library. So it would get my creature out of play here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to say no to that. Now, I could Sinister Sabotage, but I'm actually going to use my Frilled Mystic over here. So this is a creature. It's a 3/2 Elf Lizard Wizard. Lizard Wizard is fun to say. With Flash, so I can cast it on my opponent's turn. So I will do that. So Frilled Mystic gets cast. Brineborn Cutthroat gets a counter. And because I'm not in full control mode, it is auto-resolving things in a sane way. Now my Mystic has come into play. That, it's worth noting, Eternal Isolation is still on the stack at this point. It has not resolved. But Frilled Mystic has, it's come into play, and now it says, when it comes into play, I may counter target spell. I can choose not to, I could decline, but in this case, I absolutely want to say yes. I want to take this action, and it's going to counter that spell. It automatically targeted it because it was the only legal target. Thank you, Magic Arena. Done. So you don't get to cast that, and I get another creature in here. I'm going to hit pass to the attacker phase. I'm betting he doesn't attack me. Indeed, he does not. I pass here. He's in his second main phase. He didn't do anything else. It's in his end phase. Before his turn ends, I'm going to cast Swap to scry the top card. Also give another token to my Cutthroat. Hey! Okay, I'm going to leave the Brazen Burrow up there because I want to talk about this. Alright, Brazen Burrower. So this is a card from the Throne of Eldraine expansion. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's what's called an adventure card here in this. This is not part of the core Magic 2020 set here, but this is an interesting one. So I can cast the Brazen Burrower. It's a 3-mana, 3/1 flyer with Flash, so I can cast this on my opponent's turn, and it can only block creatures with flying. So, so it's a 3/1 creature with some stuff going on. I can cast it like that, but I can also, instead of casting this card as the Brazen Burrower, I can instead cast it as Petty Theft. It's a 2 casting cost instant that returns a target non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So I can bounce one of my opponent's creatures with this. And Adventure, even though it's not listed on the card over here, I think the paper version of this, which can have much smaller font, explains what Adventure is. But here we get a pop-out. If I cast Petty Theft, rather than this card going into my graveyard, which is normally what happens when you cast an instant, this card is instead exiled. So it's not in play, it's not in the library, it's not in the graveyard, it's in a separate, zone, it's in limbo somewhere else. But specifically with adventure cards, I then have the ability to cast the creature itself later on from exile. So I get to cast this card twice, once for Petty Theft and once for Brazen Borrower. It's very cool. So, well, at this point, I probably should attack, right? I have enough people to be able to block whatever Sparky does. I should, on my turn, attack with a Cutthroat and the Ambusher or something like that, probably. I don't know. I'm just going to go ahead and skip my turn and not do anything, because I may want to showcase a few extra stuff. Nightpack Ambusher, once again, creates a new creature. Are you going to attack? Probably not. Are you going to cast anything in your second main phase? No, nothing to cast. Sparky, you have 6 mana. What are you doing over there? So now I can do more stuff. So what I would do at this point is definitely put down the Nightpack Ambusher. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show off the Brazen Burrower here. So this is not part of core Magic 2020, but it's certainly something you're going to be dealing with if you play now, because this expansion and this mechanic is going to be in Magic for quite some time. If I try to cast this, it'll ask me, which one do I want to do? So if I play the Burrower, it's just going to be in play as a creature. But yeah, if I do Petty Theft, what it's going to do, it's going to let me bounce a creature. So let's say I bounce the Hazmat Officer here. Hey, it's casting a spell, so the Cutthroat gets another +1/+1. And then Brazen Burrower is over here. This is not in my hand. See, it's separated over here. It's not in my hand. It's off in exile. It's off in limbo. But I'm going to go and cast it now. So it's the end of Sparky's turn. This, as a creature, it's got Flash, so I can cast it when I play an instant. So I'm going to cast it now and put you into play. Get another +1/+1 on my Cutthroat. You can see how much fun this deck is, right? Oof. I just realized that audio is pretty loud. Should have brought it down a little sooner. So there you go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and attack with everything. I'm going to hit space, and space, and space, and just attack with everything. You're going to block there. You know what? That's fine. You can kill the Frilled Mystic. I don't care. Oh! Moment of Heroism! And Tactical Adventure. One of the things Sparky will do is Sparky will not correctly notice that he doesn't actually need to cast all of these all the time. But Sparky's going to try to give a +2/+2 and another +2/+2 to the Savannah Sage over here so that it doesn't die to the Mystic. I could counter it. Actually, I only have enough to counter one. because I don't have enough mana to use both my counters. So either way, the Frilled Mystic's going to die. You know what? I'm okay with that. We're going to hit Resolve All. You can go ahead and trigger both of those. So you're going to have a 6/6. Sparky's going to gain a bunch of life from this, thanks to the life link as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and keep passing. Now, that looks like it leaves me without a blocker, which could potentially kill me, except Night Pack Ambusher here is going to make me an extra blocker. Woo! Ah, Meteor Golem. Fun card. Costs 7 for only 3/3. Comes into play. It destroys target non-land permanent opponent controls. Worth noting, you don't have to declare the target for Meteor Golem at this time, because it's when it comes into play as a secondary effect. I am going to go ahead and counter that. And I'm going to do it with, I guess, the Frilled Mystic. So my Mystic's going to come into play. Then give me a chance to counter a spell, which I will happily do by hitting spacebar. And counter that so you can't destroy anything. I'm going to pass. I'm going to pass. Before my turn ends, I'm going to cast Once Upon a Time. This lets me look at the top 5 cards of my deck, choose a creature or land, and put it into play. Here, I'll put another Frilled Mystic into play, or into my hand. And we'll just go and finish this up. Okay, so hopefully... Oof, that is still super loud. I'm just looking at my audio levels here. My apologies. I hope the... I'm going to have to check the audio in the video before I upload this. But probably it's going to be alright. Hopefully this gives you a little bit more information on the phases, the steps and phases. It's really important. And hey, if I remembered one extra thing, I would have played even better, because I would have remembered who gets priority to do those things. But it's really important to note that there is life outside of the main step. Right? You can cast spells. You can cast spells in your own upkeep step. You can cast spells during your own combat step. I mean, that one's pretty obvious. You can cast spells during your own end step. But more importantly, and here's the biggest thing, remember to try to cast things as late as possible. In particular, if you can get away with it, cast spells during your opponent's end step. Because if you do that, it means you've had your mana untapped this whole time, being threatening to your opponent. Your opponent has no idea what's in your hand. All it knows is you've got cards in your hand, you've got mana untapped. There's all sorts of nefarious things you might be waiting to do. So you leave your mana untapped as long as possible, then finally during their end step, you play some instants or something like that, and then immediately your turn starts and you untap all your land right away, which is wonderful. Keeps your options open as long as possible. One of the sneaky things you can do, even if you don't have any instants to cast, sometimes you keep some extra land in your hand. If you literally don't need land to cast your stuff, and you draw too much land, keep the extra land in your hand as a bluff that you're holding on to more things. Especially, it's perfectly fine to hold one land, because, even if your next turn you draw something that's expensive and you needed that land in play, well, it's still in your hand, so you can play it right away then. Keeping multiple lands in your hand might sometimes mean you pick up something expensive and all of a sudden you sort of screwed yourself and you can't play what you want. But ideally you should know your deck and therefore work around that kind of idea. But yeah, it is a nice sneaky trick. So every time, don't play cards on autopilot. Think, do I really need to play this now? Would I rather play it later? Different things like that. Sometimes you actually do want to play things ahead of time. One of the things I did want to showcase with this deck, and this is something that comes up in this deck, but it's something to keep in mind. So with the Cutthroat, I would like this to be in play before I cast another instant on someone else's turn. So here's what I can do. Let's say I have both a Cutthroat and a Quench. Quench is a counter spell in my hand. My opponent plays something I would like to counter. Well, what I should do is I should make sure that the Cutthroat gets into play before I actually cast Quench. There's 2 different ways to do this. Actually, no, there's only one way to do this. My bad. What I do, in response to whatever they did that I want to counter, I'm going to play my Cutthroat. I'm going to play it. And I'm probably going to want to make sure I go into full control mode for this. I'm going to play my Cutthroat, let the Cutthroat resolve. So the Cutthroat is now in play, but the other person's spell has not yet resolved. Then I'm going to cast Quench or Sinister Sabotage or whatever I want to do to counter their actual spell. The second I cast this, the Cutthroat, who's already in play, would then get its +1/+1 token. There's a lot of little timing things that you ultimately want to maybe keep in mind when you're playing Magic. And even if you're not playing, so this Flash deck here is all instant, so obviously it's a really good way to demonstrate like these timing things, but every deck's gonna have some in there, even if you're just you're playing a red deck with some shocks or something like that. When should you cast Shock? Again, the last possible second. You know, let's say they've got a creature you want to kill. Well, let's say if it's its turn they cast it, right? So your opponent's just cast a creature that's got 2 toughness or less. So you can kill it with your shock. You could shock it immediately. You could shock it at the end of their turn. You could actually wait all the way until their next turn and when they're about to attack and then shock it then. Now, when is the right thing to do it? Well, it's partially going to depend on what the creature is as well as your mana situation. Maybe you're going to want to shock it at the end of their turn so that you have all your mana available next turn, right? Because what could happen is you don't shock at the end of their turn. Your turn starts, you spend all your mana summoning some big creature or something like that, and then you no longer have the ability to shock their stuff. On the other hand, sometimes shocking in their attack phase is a lot sneakier. Generally speaking, most likely, if you can shock something on their end turn and kill it, that's when you're going to do it. Most likely it's going to come up where either you didn't have a shock in your hand, but you just drew it, and then you'll wait until their attack action and do it then, or maybe you had the shock in your hand, but you didn't have the mana untapped then. So again, you'd have to wait. And in either case, you'd want to wait until probably the second they declare an attacker, or the second they try to buff that creature. That's always good, right? If you're playing, if you're playing against a deck where they like to buff their creatures, doing something that adds +1/+1 tokens to it, or they're going to use some sort of enchant creature spell, or they're going to equip it with an item or something like that, you wait until they've just spent all their mana playing their enchantment to buff their creature, and you're like, oh, you know, before that +100/+100 enchantment resolves, yeah, I'm just going to shock the creature while it's still a 1/1. How do you like them apples? The later you delay, the better. Because then, not only did you still kill the creature, but the enchantment they were trying to cast now fizzles and goes into the graveyard. If you had killed the creature early, they would have just saved the enchantment and put it on a different creature. So again, the latest you can do something, the better it is. So there you go. Maybe that's the one lesson of this tutorial. As far as I know, this is the final scheduled tutorial for this series. If you do have any more questions, do leave them in the comments. I am planning on doing some more videos for this. In particular, what I've been doing for the last week or so is on my streaming days, I tend to play a few rounds of this on stream before the main streaming game, and that's been a lot of fun. So do make sure to check out twitch.tv/Quill18 if you haven't done it already, and otherwise stay tuned to the UpTubs for probably some more Magic content, because the addiction has definitely been reignited here, as I knew it would. God, I love Magic. Thanks for watching, folks. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.